Look, on Leadership Now, I promised never to do commercials, but here we are. Why? Well, I have a new book in the works. It's coming out spring 2026, and I wanted to give you an advance heads up about it. The title, The Future of Work is Gray, and it's kind of a big deal to me because the book dives into the age crisis that's reshaping work as we know it. It's something that I call age debt, but spoiler alert, it does turn into some solution. There's some hope, there's some positive, and that's called the experience dividend. So if your workplace still thinks that age is a liability, well, it's time to retire that mindset. In fact, we might want to retire the word retire. So yeah, I don't do ads. This is a special occasion, and for it, I am willing to go gray. And maybe Grey Goose will sponsor me, not sure. Anyway, spring 2026, the future of work is gray. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Leadership Now with me, Dan Pontefract. Today in the house, oh my gosh, am I so excited. We're going to talk to Rose Fass. Rose, a short bio, welcome. And then we're going to get right into it. Rose, founder and chair of, get this, Fass Forward Consulting Group. That's such a clever pun. As a pun master, I think you're doing really well, Rose. You're a leading edge business transformation leader with your firm, Fass Forward Consulting Group. Rose works with executive teams from Fortune 500 companies. She's the trusted advisor to firms like MasterCard, Verizon, Chick-fil-A, and many, many more. Her work delivers thought leadership, methodologies, and tools to tackle challenging issues, solving complex business problems, executing on strategies, and achieving tangible business results. Rose is a dynamic speaker, invited frequently to speak at private and public sector events. She's been a guest on places like CNBC and quoted in several business best-selling books. She's also the former Chief Transformation Officer at Xerox. She's the author of a few books, including The Chocolate Conversation, Lead Bittersweet Change and Transform Your Business, and The Leadership Conversation, Make Bold Change One Conversation at a Time. And finally, Rose, you've been awarded the Great Companies International Entrepreneurship Award in 2024, featured in Fortune's Most Powerful Women of 2022, and Entrepreneur 100 Women of Influence in Westchester. You're listed on the Forbes 2012 Top 10 Women Business Leaders of New York. Rose, welcome to Leadership Now. It's a delight to chat with you. I've got a bunch of questions about who you are, how you're doing what you do. But what I want to start with is the fact that you have 40 years or over 40 years of experience in tech and consumer-based industries. You've led major corporate transformations. You've held roles with full P&L responsibility. You're a leader's leader in my mind, at least during the reconnaissance that I did on you. So one of the things I wanted to talk about was change in leadership, meaning you've seen a few things over your career, a few decades in the mix right now. So what is it that you've seen that has been shifting, for better, for worse, or maybe not as much as we all think it is, in terms of how leaders are leading in this day and age?
So a couple of thoughts on that, and thank you for that lovely introduction. It always makes me sound like a big piece of stuff, and I'm actually an Italian-American girl, the grandchild of immigrants who couldn't go beyond that first generation that they were part of, and I'm from East Utica, New York, originally. So fun to be here. My dad was a World War II Marine, which is where I first learned about leadership, be up at 0600 and ready for company. And it covered a multitude of sins. I think what I see in leaders today, from a positive point of view, there is definitely a more emphasis on how to lead, why it's important, what's lacking in leadership. And we see it with Jamie Dimon and a number of CEOs, Bill McDermott, who I worked with for a number of years, who's the CEO of ServiceNow. And I was on the team that hired Bill into Xerox back in the day when, he came in a borrowed suit, and we went to Gartner together, and we left after a year. And he's still a very strong people leader. There is also, unfortunately, a big gap in leaders who are having genuine, authentic conversations with people. A lot shifted after the pandemic when everything went remote and leaders were struggling with how to connect. and
Mhm.
how to really make meaningful interaction with people. You and I, we talked about being kindred spirits. We know that leadership lies in the human interaction between people. And I think that's what's deeply missing today. I think that was one of the things that stood out for me most um, during the pandemic was that leaders were at a loss for how to have that human, warm connection and an empathy for what people were going through and how to actually have a conversation, even before the pandemic. So my thoughts about this are leadership happens into the conversation. Years ago, and I'm sure you experienced this as well, you could literally walk into people's offices, sit down, and have a chat.
Mhm.
Today, everything is calendared. You can't even get to your boss in a given day. So when something of an emergency arises, doesn't matter where you are in the pecking order, you could be all the way as a frontline manager. You do not have time on your calendar to deal with that without an appointment or an interruption. And I think that's a huge issue.
Mm.
I think making the space for people to actually be in conversation with you is one of the greatest opportunities and challenges in today's world.
There's so much to unpack with that, and I couldn't agree more. Let me just back up a bit with Bill McDermott, because spending some time at SAP, I was in the vortex and the orbit of Bill and watching him operate in that way when he would do site visits. And he wouldn't just sit in a boardroom and let people come to him. Bill would walk around like he was the Long Island hot dog seller that he was back in the day. And there was a visceral, empathetic DNA that he exhibited to make sure that he could connect and to understand and just mosey around to say, hey, what you doing today? What can I learn from you? And so your point about calendaring almost every minutia of leadership seems antithetical to what leaders are supposed to be doing, a la Bill McDermott, who wouldn't believe in calendaring his day to day in such a way that doesn't allow him the fortitude and opportunity
Absolutely.
to be with other people. If you hear me.
Absolutely. You know, it was interesting when we were both at Xerox. We went through a lot of change, and he and I made the decision to move on to a job at Gartner.
Hmm.
He was becoming president, and I was the chief transformation officer there as well as Xerox. And it was a much smaller pond, but there was a gentleman that was running it at the time, a CEO whose name will go unmentioned because I'm not going to do something that's not kind. But he signed a convertible note for the market cap of that company without a floor, and then made this just sweep of acquisitions that made no sense strategically.
Mm.
Bill and I were like, oh my God, what did we get into? A year later, we were both faced with the realization that the venture capitalists were coming in and they were going to take the company back because the due came up. And Bill left to go to Siebel.
Hmm.
And he asked me if I wanted to go. And I couldn't go to the West Coast at the time because parents were not well. And I said, no, it's not going to work out. And that's when I started Fast Forward with an engineer that I had met at Gartner. And Bill didn't work well with Siebel either because culturally they were not the same. So that's when he
Exactly.
left and went to SAP.
Yeah.
And I met him over there and I saw, the challenge that was set before him. He became a co-CEO, if you remember,
Oh
within
yeah.
I
Yeah.
was
Yes. Which must have killed him.
and then ultimately, God bless him. What it showed is that the technical aspects of who you are and your expertise won't take you all the way. Bill didn't have that technical expertise as an engineer.
Mhm.
It was a learned skill. What he had was the ability to have genuine, authentic conversations with people. He wrote the foreword to my first book, and he wrote actually the subtext to my second one, Making Bold Change One Conversation at a Time, which was his view of me. And we share that. And I think having realized that people don't see how important it is to have those bold conversations, those genuine, authentic interactions, as you spoke to, leaders today, I mean, I just heard Jamie Dimon having a sort of a rant with his people, not wrongly so, by the way. He had decided everybody needed to come back to the office.
Hmm.
It wasn't about coming back to work. It was about coming back to the office so that you could have the interactions that you were deprived of during the pandemic. And his view was, we can't do this all on Zoom, guys.
Hmm.
It cannot happen that way. We can't text message each other throughout the Zoom call and we're not paying attention. And where are you getting your role models? And how are you actually cross-functionally spending time with people? Because you only are zoomed in on whoever it is in your organization. So he used a lot of colorful language. And he basically said they gave him a petition, whole group of employees. And he said, blankety blank that petition. I'm not buying into that petition. You're coming back or you're going to work someplace else. Now, whether we agreed with that or not, that was a bold leadership conversation that he had decided needed to happen in that moment in time to get young people to start interacting with each other. Because you and I had that opportunity growing up. We weren't even thinking about working from home.
Hmm.
It was about, the opportunity to get dressed and go someplace else. I'm not suggesting that a hybrid isn't the best because I do believe in it. And I think the future of work has got to allow for remote opportunities for talent and all of that good stuff. But there is something to be said for the opportunity. And I often say the new offsite is the onsite. Bring people in. Don't bring them in to just work on their computers and do their daily gig. Bring them in to have a meaningful experience. And so I think whether we agreed with Jamie Dimon or not, or any of the number of people that are requiring this or asking for this, it is about having those bold conversations that may not be popular, but at the same time, expressing a point of view that matters to you.
Hmm.
And I think people follow leaders like that. So that's just an example, a recent example of what I see as filling a leadership gap.
Well, you are a leader and have both demonstrated in executive roles and well as, of course, with your firm. One of the things I wanted to get into about leadership is transformation. I mean, not only are you an aficionado, you've got decades of experience in the transformation of various projects, initiatives, organizations, units, et cetera. But you also speak of, quote, the messy middle. I'm very curious to get your thoughts on, as a transformation genius and wizard with wisdom oozing, and we'll get into wisdom after this, by the way. During these business transformations, what is it that you see are the impediments or the reasons to get to that messy middle? And then, with your experience, how does one or an organization, unit, et cetera, team get out of and manage the challenging aspects of the messy middle?
Thank you for asking. So I kind of think that transformations very frequently start with the top of the house putting out a bold call to action. What needs to change?
Mm.
Then what happens is it dribbles down. And what I see as the messy middle is middle management, which is like the sandwich generation. They're translating the call to action, the strategic imperatives into what will be implementable and execution for that strategy to the people that are working for them and with them. So they're the translators, the interpreter and the translators, and then they have to be the drivers of change.
Hmm.
It all either happens well or dies in that messy middle. And I call it the messy middle because you have to sort of think about, what am I actually doing today? What are all my people doing? And how do I disrupt that in a way that allows them a comfortable transition from the current way in which we're doing business to where we need to shift? I worked with John Seeley Brown, who was the head of the R&D and all of it at Park, Palo Alto Research. He's now at the Aspen Institute. But I learned a lot from him. And he said, Rose, transformation is not about bold change. It really is, how do we transition the current form to take a new action? He broke the word down in that way. It helped me a lot. And it was early days before I had anything to do with transformation other than trying to figure it out. But I thought that transition, kind of like those little toys that the kids have, that become a robot and then it becomes a car. And so I thought, how do you transition? So I asked him that, and he said, you kind of communicate in the old paradigm. Then you translate to what becomes the new paradigm, the way in which people need to think differently. Because to do things differently, you have to see them differently. I think that's where the messy middle comes in. They have a unique gift. And middle managers get a bad rap. They don't always get the rewards, acknowledgement, and respect that they deserve for all that they have to do. Because that's where real transformation happens. It happens in the messy middle. It happens in their ability to interpret strategy in a way that buffers their people from complete and utter disruption to that transition in form to take a new action. And the good ones, they're remarkable. When you've got those kind of people working in that messy middle, it allows you to do what you need to do. And I think we pay little attention to it. I think senior leaders just sort of think, I've said it, I've come down with the tablets, and somehow they're going to just go, make it all happen. And the 40 years in the desert that starts happening after that is not something they even anticipate. Bringing those people in earlier on, asking, what was your interpretation of what I just said, so that you're not having a chocolate conversation? You're not talking past each other. What did I just say? How do you interpret it? What do you think will work? What do you think won't work? Is it too much too soon? I think those things need to happen. And the middle of the company needs to be very engaged and not just on the receiving end of the tablets.
Thou shalt, right, Rose? Thou shalt.
Yes.
So you've entered into an area and line of thinking and questioning that I wanted to get into. So you must be prescient. And that is the organization itself. And we'll get to chocolate conversations because they all wrap together in this question about to ask you. I believe that we are not generations, but that we are personas in an organization. And you and me alike, uh, we travel through three distinct personas and what I'm calling rivers, rocks, and rubies.
I love it.
Rivers are the young, fluid, intelligent, professionals who are trying to make their way, figure things out. Rocks, of course, are your aforementioned middle managers, the ones that are planted, still lots of fluid intelligence in them, but they're there in the middle, and they're the rocks. Different ways to use the term. And then the rubies are the ones with that crystallized intelligence. Those individuals whom have quote seen it all, and they've got tricks, they've got shortcuts, they've got tacit knowledge, etc. In your chocolate conversation point, the other metaphor I wanted to weave in here, you talk about misaligned language and how that can lead to organizational dysfunction. So where I'm going with this now, of course, is as a transformation aficionado, guru, and Jedi, how does chocolate conversations create that dysfunction when we have these three competing at times, but at least differentiated personas? What do you think about that in your hindsight, looking in back, and then the work you're still doing in transforming organizations?
Yeah, that's a very big, rich question. And I don't think we take advantage of and the first one was, there was the rocks and the rubies. What was the first one?
The rivers, yeah, the young
Rivers,
pros.
the young. There's a huge opportunity for us to create a strong level of interdependence between those three. You've heard the statement that unfortunately has taken on a life of its own. Well, so-and-so is aging out.
Yeah.
Yeah, horrible, right? And what we fail to realize is the wisdom that's available from the ruby that we think is aging out. Now,
Mhm.
some of them absolutely have reached their time and do need to go. But there are some really fabulous sages that need to stay in the corporation to provide what you talk about, wisdom. Because wisdom is the application of knowledge, and it has know-how and experience and pain, and recovery from that pain. And the whole idea of having made every mistake you can make and at the same time achieve the successes through the learning from those mistakes. Those are people that have wisdom, okay? Not the ones that have soared, the ones that have had all of that bumpy road. Then you have those rocks who are the solid people that are trying to learn from those people that have that wisdom and translate that to the new rivers that are coming in that have so much to offer, the flow of new ideas, using that metaphor and pushing it, the flow of thinking differently than you do. I love it. Early on in my career, we had a job sharing program that we adopted that then became the Pregnant Woman's Program. So if two women were pregnant, they could share a job. Later on, there was an elderly gentleman that worked for me. He was in his 70s, but he's extraordinary and the customers loved him. And there was a new guy coming on board. He had a best friend that was around his age, the older gentleman, both of whom wanted to work part-time. They wanted to stay working. And I knew that the young guy needed a full-time job. So I took the Pregnant Woman's Program and I said, can I apply this job share to these three? So I told the young guy, you're going to learn from these two dudes. They're older than you, they're smarter, they've been everywhere, and they can use you with the new technologies and everything that they don't know and understand to expedite some of their ways in which they get the business over the goal line. It was incredibly successful. I mean, the young guy loved it. The two older guys got to do the part-time thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I saw him on a plane with the curmudgeon. One of them was a curmudgeon. I love the guy, but he was a real curmudgeon. And I said, how's it going? And he says, gotta love this guy. Gotta love him. He knows everything. He knows the people. They love him. And he goes, and I just do all the work for him. So he's happy to have me around because I'm writing the scope of work. So I'm taking care. And the guy actually smiled, the older guy, with that chuckle. And it turned out to be a brilliant idea. That was in 1982.
Wow.
I thought about today, how many of those people are around, and you and I both know not enough. Okay. You walk through the halls and it's like Logan's Run, you're
If you're able to walk through the halls, but yes, I get the point.
even on the virtual halls. What do you see? You see a lot of young people with no guidance, no sages to go to. And if the sage is all the way up in the C-suite, how often are they going to get the opportunity to have that conversation? So I think one of the ways to change that chocolate conversation, and I know I've taken this in a little bit of a different swing for you, is to change our worldview about having older people in the workplace remain. Changing the standards that we set for when you need to leave and when you get to stay, and recognizing that to you, there is no generation, there's personas. And to me, there's only one generation, the digital generation. We all have to be part of it, however old we are or however young we are. And we have to participate with it in a way that makes sense for all three, the rivers, the rocks, and the rubies. And I will say that I have a young man working for me that's 22, that's a river, that just wrote the introduction of me for my book, and it was beyond good, better than good, okay? A woman that's on this right now with me, Christina, is one of those rocks, and she's a rock star. And it just polishes my ruby. So I think that you're on the right path, and we need to be able to change that chocolate conversation, that worldview, that standard, that concern that someone should age out and have a different language. Really important for us to make that consideration.
Well, speaking of rock stars and ruby stars, you are one and have showed time and time again in various companies' roles, and now with Fass Forward, the people want to work with you, Rose. People want to be around you, and I'm assuming that they're not looking at you as someone who might be in their 70s. It's the competence over chronology point that I believe that you're being hired for. So how is it in this day and age that some are suffering from ageism and wretched examples of ageism. Yet here you are demonstrating competence and credibility, and people are hiring you for your transformation and business and leadership acumen. Tell me a bit about how you see where the world needs to grow up.
Yeah, well, we've talked about what I think in terms of where the world needs to grow up. But for me, just like you, we had to find our own sovereignty. I had to start a company so I could stay working.
Mm.
At 51, I left Gartner with Bill McDermott. I actually went to a consulting firm that wanted to hire me. It was one of those silver buildings in Manhattan, and I was on my way back to Grand Central to kind of get on the train and go home and think about it. And it was with a guy that I had worked with at Xerox that was a big consultant at this firm. We came out of a restaurant below the building that was in the actual housing of the offices. And I walked out, and frankly, I couldn't see where I was going. I got disoriented for a minute. And he came out and said, "Do you know where you're going?" And then I clipped in and realized, yeah, I got to go here to head to Grand Central. But a metaphor for me came right into my head. And I said, "I think I do."
Mm.
And he said, "Okay, I'll speak to you Monday." And I started walking to Grand Central. I was 51 at the time. And I said, I could do this, but I'm going to be back in that same boat 5 to 6 years from now with them wondering whether I should still be doing this.
Uh,
I need to kind of consider what will have more longevity for me and where I really want to go. And the risks that I was going to take, it was right before 9/11 that I
mhm.
started July, and then September 9/11 happened. So I got on the train and I realized at that point in time, and that conversation we have with ourselves is probably most important. We have to change our own worldview. You had to change yours to decide what could you do differently. And look at all the books you've written and everything you've done as a result of it. God bless you. And here we are, two contemporaries having this brilliant conversation about something that if we hadn't done this, we might be at Shady Oaks trying to figure out, why we're there. Um, it sort of kept me, take blow drying my hair in the mornings and making sure that I have lipstick on and that I'm walking around looking like I'm not dead. I think it's one of those things. The other thing, I think the reason people are willing to listen is because they marvel at the fact, just like they do for you, that someone my age can still have a contemporary point of view, have young people around me so that I make sure that they see a balance of these rocks, rivers, and rubies. And when I started the company, I started it with a guy that was 37 years old, Brit, wore glasses, 6 feet tall, good looking, wore a suit beautifully. He didn't know anything about transformation. He was an engineer, but he was brilliant. And I thought, you know what? As a female, I needed to be with this guy. So when we walked in a room, we would have instant credibility. He had the youth and he was handsome and it was all going to work. And then I thought, this gives me credibility. And then I carried it for a while until now he's one of my co-CEOs and he's spectacular. But we spent 24 years together. He's now in the 50s. So I look at it as I managed to maintain what I was able to do by being sovereign like you. I wish more corporations were open to the fact that boomers work their asses off, have an extraordinary ability to adapt and deal. Because look at what we've lived through. Odd
Yeah.
and even gas lines, terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center, Martin Luther King's death. I mean, we can go through it all. My brother in Vietnam. I mean, I can tell you the whole story. We got a lot to offer from life's experience and things that young people cherish and care about. One of my rocks does not have parents or siblings available to her. And so, as a mentor, I feel like I can be that for that person as well. We can offer that sort of generational kindness, nurture, consideration, safety that
Mm.
allows that person to come and speak with you openly because you've been through it all. And it's not a big deal to not, to hear something that bothers that other person. I remember my dad as a World War II Marine, dealing with my brother when we went through that bank fail, the big bank fail, and my brothers were doing really, really badly and struggling. And they said, Dad, was it this bad during the Depression? And he said, way worse, way worse. And that gave them comfort. But he could tell of an experience during that time. People were jumping out of damn buildings, and it was a very different. So I think for each generation, we need that. And we got to bring it back. And I'm trying to get people in corporations to see that, to stop this whole thing of everyone needs to age out. Some people do, some people don't.
Well, you are all age. I have one more question for you, which segues nicely to what you just talked about a bit a couple seconds ago there. And you talked about mentoring. And what I wanted to ask you is a more personal question. And I mean, the elephant in the room obviously is that you're a Ruby and in your 70s. How have you demonstrated this autodidact, self-learning, continuous improvement DNA? You didn't fold it in when you were 51. Uh, and you certainly hadn't folded in when you were 21. So it seems to me that you've got a DNA in one in which that is learned, curious, pushing yourself to learn more. And so what I wanted people to hear from you directly was, how do you make that happen? How are you still so, I guess, responsible for an insatiable appetite to figure out, well, what's next?
I do think that that's part of my upbringing. And I think whether we like it or not, at the young cognitive ages that we start out in a family, I think that's something that my dad and mom gave me. I used to say my mom could do more over a cup of tea than any psychiatrist. And she never got past the 10th grade because she had to help my grandfather in the grocery store when the Depression hit. My dad joined the Marine Corps when he was 18. And everything about him was about learning. So, a very quick signature story that I've lived with my whole life. We lived in East Utica. I was an Italian American girl. I lived in a four flat home that my father struggled to get a mortgage for, cold water flats. I remember my mother heating water to give us baths.
Mhm.
And Annette Funicello lived down the street from me. And for those young people, Annette Funicello used to be part of a Mickey Mouse Club, and she did all these beach party bingo kind of things. And we were very jealous when she got taken by Disney, discovered. So all my little Italian friends and I just walked down the street, these little girls, like 9 years old, carrying on like lunatics. And she was like 14. Um, and we said bad things and jealousies and all these kind of things. And I remember my dad wasn't doing all that well. He was on the GI Bill going back to college. And I'm sitting there going, and her father owns a gas station. It was like ridiculous. So I walked down the street one day and my father had had enough of this. Believe me, my mother was being empathetic, but my father was getting frustrated. And he was both a philosopher, he was a published poet and a warrior, having been a Marine. Tail gunner, 85% mortality rate. So lived through the Depression, hired on as a cropper for my grandfather's friends, and in the Battle of World War II at 18 years old. So you can imagine the bandwidth that he had for this little conversation. But anyway, I walked up and he was holding a dandelion and he said, Rose, what do you see? And I got very frustrated because I wanted to be famous and I wanted to go to Hollywood and I wanted to be an Funicello and I did not want to have that conversation. So I'm like, I don't know, Dad. And he said, Rose, look again. I want to know what you see. And I said, I don't know, Dad. What do you see? He said, I see the end of a long winter, the dawning of a new season. I see lovers exchanging these in silent I love yous. I see children plucking them and putting them in juice glasses so their mothers can put them on the windowsills of their kitchens. I looked at him. I started to cry. And I said, you see a lot, Dad. And he said, Rose, soon the beautiful flowers are going to come along. And this once beautiful expression of spring is going to become a weed and a distortion to the lawn. And I, like many homeowners, will do everything to pluck them out, burn them out, do whatever we can. The beauty of the dandelion is not in rearing its glorious head as an introduction to spring. The beauty of the dandelion lies in the root, in its resilience. Your mother and I, we've named you Rose, but roses are fragile. In your heart, you need to be a dandelion. I didn't fully get that at 9 years old. I sort of did. I know I felt better after I had a big cry in the arms of the Marine and the poet. But as I went through my life, I realized I'm a weed. Every once in a while, I get a little glory and I can feel like a big piece of stuff, but then it won't be long before someone's going to cut me down and weed me out and make me feel less than. That keeps me curious. That keeps me wanting to know more. That keeps me looking for that next thing that I can learn from somebody else that will help me sustain whatever semblance of joy, contentment, and peace we can have in this life.
Wow. Rose, in the spirit of Annette Funicello, I would say that we were destined to meet, and it's a small world after all. That was powerful.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Um, this has been an absolute joy to get to know you, to hear from your wisdom, your ruby mind, and ruby soul. It's not lost on me either, that story about rose and dandelions and how everyone really needs to take stock with their work and life to ensure that they don't get cut down. And if they do, what are you going to do with resilience to rise again? It's an incredible moment of leadership I think you've just bestowed upon anyone that comes across these words, this video, the podcast itself, and it's just a absolute joy to hear from you, Rose. Thank you for this.
It's been really lovely speaking with you too. I look forward to us having more of these conversations in the future.
As do I. I think we're new besties. We're new Ruby
Okay,
besties, Rose.
good. I love that.
Well, folks, you've been listening and or watching to Rose Fass. She's the founder and chair of Fass Forward Consulting Group, and one incredible human being. Thanks for watching and listening. And again, thank you, Rose.